Describe your birth and childhood.
Well, I was born in West Hartlepool, Durham County, in the north part of England, on June the 24th, 1936, to Joseph Sidney Almond and Anne Short. We lived there for about 5 years till the war broke out, the Second World War. And then, because we lived on the coast near the North Sea and the Germans were flying over, Winston Churchill said that the mothers and children had to move away from the coastline. And so Mother and her sister-in-law, my aunt Jenny, with her 2 little boys, and Mother and my older brother and I moved to a little cottage in Stanhope. It was only about 30 miles away from our hometown, but it was in the center of the country in a very unpopulated area. We lived there for 5 years till the war ended. No electricity, no running water. We had to turn out the lights, at night. Well, it was dark in England by 4 o'clock. I started school there, but we were very deprived. We ate mostly bread and potatoes. We couldn't import anything, so there was no fruit or vegetables or etc. We had our Saturday night bath in a little iron tub. The girls got to go first because they were the cleanest, and then the 3 boys. The facilities for urinating, etc., were outside. You had to walk, probably at least 30 steps. Our water was outdoor side too. You had to turn the tap on. So we had to walk outside up onto what they called, they were the outhouses for all of the neighbors. They all used these 4 little circles like they have up at the ranch. Anyway, at the end of the war, we moved back to our hometown, West Hartlepool. By then, my mother had had 3 more children, so I had 2 brothers and a younger sister. My mother was the oldest of 7 children. Her father died when she was 10, and she was sort of a breadwinner to help her mother raise those younger boys. But next to her was my Uncle Stanley. He was the 2nd oldest. He had remained active in the church. The others, and it's probably important to talk about Albert and Anne. They were my great-grandparents. They were the ones that joined the church when my mother was just a baby. And they were stalwart in the church, had all of their children baptized, and tried to raise them in the church, which was very unpopular in England at the time. But of all those children, most of them fell away from the church. There was no active branch there, except West Hartlepool after the war. Uncle Stan was the branch president. And so when everyone came back from the war, my uncles who were prisoners in Germany, my dad came back from the camp he was at. My Uncle Stan said, you should get your spouses and your children active in the church and get them baptized. So I was baptized at 10 years old after the war in the North Sea. There were no fonts or anything back there. It's very cold. You had to walk out quite a ways to get deep enough to be submerged. I do remember just freezing. I was purple when I came out. My mother was rubbing and the sand was against my body. I thought it was a very uncomfortable day. But at 10, and my dad had missionaries after 2 or 3 different sets, he found one that he could accept, and he did accept the gospel. And so when my Uncle Stan dropped this bomb, he said, I'm going to Salt Lake City, Utah, the headquarters of the church. And he said, I suggest that each of you bring your families over there too. But I thought, no way is my dad going to give up his good job, his home, leave his mother, and go to America. But he did. It was part of the Lord's plan, I think. So I've left out, when we came back to West Hartlepool, I started school again. This is an all-girls school. They separated boys and girls because they didn't want them to be, thinking about the opposite sex. So I was in an all-girls school where we wore a uniform, and it was navy blue wool, with buttons on, and a white shirt, and you wore that for 4 years. The 4 years you were at school. You started out as a first former, and second former, third former, fourth former. So you wore that uniform for 4 years with your long sleeved shirt. And I had one dress that I wore on Sundays. So when we came to America, I turned 14 years old on the boat coming over. I gave my uniform to a little girl across the street, still in pretty good shape. The pleats were all gone, but it was still in pretty good shape. So I brought my one dress, one pair of shoes over to America. And my Uncle Stan took us into his home for the first couple of weeks till my dad got a job. It was so hot. It was the beginning of July, and I'd come from a temperature of never gets warmer than 60 degrees in England. The sun very seldom shone. Here I was in a place that was 90-some degrees, and every time I came upstairs I would get dizzy. My blood is so thick. But anyway, after I started school in September, I said to my mother, these American girls have something different on every day, and I'm wearing the same dress that had become a little tight, a little short. And I said, I need some new clothes. Well, if you need them, you provide them. So basically that's when I started babysitting for 25 cents an hour. I got $1 for staying with the neighbors' little girls. I started making my own clothes. At that time, it was popular to wear either poodle skirts or corduroy skirts, and Jansen sweaters. You had not heard of them, but they were a sweater set, a sweater with a cardigan on it. And by Christmas, I was able to make myself a skirt and buy a set of Jansen sweaters so that I looked like American girls. And I sounded like an American girl. I learned how to speak American. People would ask me to say something, and I love the way you say my name. Like if it was Gary, I'd say Gary and Gary. And so I'd say to my girlfriends, how do you say it? They say Gary, so it's like bear. So I would practice saying embarrass and Gary till I thought I sounded like an American girl by Christmas. So I went to high school for 4 years, even though I'd completed my schooling in England. You don't go as long, but you hit the books harder. Graduated from West High in 1954. I was offered a scholarship to the university, but I didn't want to study psychology or anything. I just wanted to be a mother and a wife. So then they offered me a scholarship to Excelsis Beauty Salon, which is downtown Salt Lake City. So I trained as a beauty operator for a year and worked for a year after. But prior to that, when I graduated that summer, a young man from Idaho moved in with his brother, Bruce, to live for the summer till he went down to BYU. And because he was a new boy in the ward, all the girls thought, wow, we want him to ask us out. So David and I became acquainted that summer. And then he went down to BYU, coming home every weekend, and we dated. And my mother fed him, which I think saved his life. He was eating a can of beans each week. After about a year of that, he decided I need a shorter commute. So he asked his uncle, a very rich architect who lived on I Street, if he could live with him and go to BYU, transferred from BYU to the U of U. And so that second year, after he'd finished his first year of BYU and 1 year of the U of U, we got married. So after his first year at the university, we got married on June the 1st, 1956. And we lived in a little apartment on Wall Street, just down from the Capitol. David was going to school all day and then working as a night watchman at a dairy place, or they raised milk. Jeff was conceived and born in Salt Lake City. And then after he graduated, after 2 more years, he accepted a position with General Mills in Boise, Idaho. He was going to be a salesman over there. So we moved to Idaho, where Jim and Joe were born. We bought a little home, cost us $6,000. But David was traveling, selling these the products, Betty Crocker products, flour and cake mixes and all that. And then after about 3 years there, his rich uncle offered to set them up in a dairy. And he asked David and Bruce to run that dairy in Rexburg, Idaho. And so we thought that's a great place to raise children on a farm. So we sold our home, we sold our car, we moved up to Rexburg, Idaho, with his older brother Bruce and his family. We lived up there. They worked hard from 5 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, milking cows and raising crops. It didn't work out. It was a terrible time of my life. A year and a half of living with stench and flies, and David working from early morning till late at night, and we were losing money. The one good thing that came off the Rexburg farm was Jared. Jared was conceived and born in Rexburg, Idaho. But after a year and a half, I said, David, get us out of here. I'll do anything. I'll go anywhere and do anything, but please get us off this dairy farm. So he told his uncle, we would like to go back to school. I've always wanted to be a hospital administrator, and I'm going to apply to a school. There were just 3 of them in the country. 2 were back east, 1 was in Oakland, California. So David found out what was required, turned in all the things that were necessary, and then in September of that year, we loaded up a van and a trailer and moved to Oakland, California, where David had been accepted into this school for hospital administrators. We were there 3 years. First year he was in the hospital learning all about hospitals. Second year was the academic year. We moved to Albany, which was the student housing, so that lowered our rent. Third year, he was given a residency in Los Angeles, California. And he was there for 1 year. That's where Jay was born. And unlike what people had told us, it's very expensive to go to school, especially with 4 children, 5. But we had saved money, and we had enough money to lay down a deposit on a home in Kirkland, Washington. So we moved up there with our 5 boys, and David became the clinic manager in the University of Washington Hospital. Then he moved up from there. We were there 7 years. He moved up from clinic manager to assistant administrator and then administrator, and then got an offer to go to Colorado. So after 7 years, David had been a bishop in Kirkland. We moved, and wait a minute, I left out Jill, John, and Jordan. Our 3 younger children were born in Kirkland. Jill, John, and Jordan. When Jordan was 2, we moved to Colorado, accepted this position as a hospital administrator. And we lived there for 3 years. And then David was offered a position with a new hospital company called Intermountain Healthcare. And he accepted that position as vice president of Intermountain Healthcare. So we moved back to Utah and bought some property in Farmington, built a home there, and lived there for almost 20 years. We had an orchard and raised lots of vegetables. We had chickens and a cow at one time. Those were wonderful years. In David's career, that was the best job he'd ever had, with working with Scott Parker, and they were just like a brotherhood that worked well together. And Bruce had helped us build a home, so David gave him property, and he built a house in our Jeppson neighborhood. And then they built a house for their mother, Ruby Jeppson, right between us on this 13 acres that we had purchased in Farmington, Utah. Very happy there for almost 20 years. And then David decided to retire early. He wanted to serve the Lord. And so we gave away all of our possessions, our homes, our property, etc. And we're going to move down to Tokerville, Utah, because David's uncle, Ruby's younger brother, had said, I've investigated, and the best place in all of the West is Tokerville, Utah. So David said, find me a lot. It's a very small town, so very seldom lots become available because the grandparents give them to their children. But we bought the property in Tokerville, Utah. So when David retired, we moved down there. We built a house first in Tokerville. It would be our permanent possession. And we built a little place in Ashton, Idaho, on a farm that we owned, figuring that we could go back and get away when it got too hot in southern Utah. And after the home was finished in Tokerville, we moved back there intending to settle down. And David was called by one of the general authorities, Marvin J. Ashton, if he would serve a mission in Birmingham, England. So before we were able to move into our Tokerville house, we were on our way to England to serve for those 3 years. When we came home, we settled into that new house in Tokerville, and we were comfortable there, loved the people in the town, David was called as a stake president for 10 years. And then at the end of those 10 years, he was called to be a sealer in the St. George Temple. And he was just getting used to that when Bruce Hafen said, "Would you be my second counselor in the St. George Temple presidency?" So we did that for 3 years. Very difficult assignment, very demanding. But after we got through, we lived in the Temple apartments because it was closer than Tocqueville, where he had to get up at 5. The early shift closed at 10 for the night shift. And so we had moved into Temple apartments because it wasn't feasible to drive for an hour a day from Tocqueville. After our 3 years at the Temple presidency, we looked at each other and said, "Why are we living in a 3-story house 30 miles away from the temple? Let's buy a house here in Salt Lake, or in St. George." So we looked around, and we actually were fortunate to find a place in Meadow Creek, which is just 5 miles from the St. George Temple. So we decided to volunteer to be temple workers. David is a sealer and me as a worker, on Tuesdays. So we went to the early shift from 7 till noon, went home and ate lunch, and then came back at 4 o'clock and served till 10 o'clock. We did that for a few years, also going to the temple on Wednesdays and Thursdays to do ordinances for our ancestors. And then the temple closed in 2020 and COVID hit. And we just relaxed and enjoyed life for a few years in our St. George home in Meadow Creek. So that's sort of the life, a very short version. You know, I think I mentioned all the kids, so that's important. Jeff was probably my problem child, very adventuresome, brave. He would try anything. He didn't care if he was punished or not. But fortunately, Jim, our second child, was much more responsible, much more obedient than Jeff. And so when they got in trouble, Jim was punished just as much as Jeff, even though Jeff was the one that stimulated everything. Joseph, of course, was a baby when we moved to the dairy farm, and I feel badly because we weren't eating very good, and I don't know, he's still strong and healthy, but I felt like he was deprived some because he was a baby up there. Jared was born on the farm and went to California with us as a baby. Very happy, adventuresome child. Always did what his older brothers asked him to do, even though it might have not been the best thing. And then Jay was born in California. Jay is what I would call a genius. He's bright almost beyond what you would expect. I mean, school came easy for him. He would help his classmates. He'd help the teacher. He developed a love for music, even though he didn't have any lessons, only a couple from Grandma. And then she said, "I can't teach this boy anything. He's telling me when I'm wrong." So he taught himself music, piano. He also was a bassoon player with the junior high, and the band leader said, "If you will take bassoon, if your dad will let you switch from saxophone, I can guarantee you'll get a scholarship anywhere in the country," because bassoonists were so rare, good ones. So Jay is, as I would say, a genius. He's almost too bright. He got his master's degree in psychology, so he's a psychologist, and he figures everybody out, tells them what their problems are, you know. We got our girl, Jill, in Kirtland, Washington, which was a blessing. And Jill went on her mission and then got her graduate degree in social services and moved to Washington, where she found her spouse and has been living there all of her married life. And she had 3 little boys, which are now almost 20 years old. John was my biggest baby, not biggest in size, wasn't a big baby, although he's very tender-hearted and very loving and warm. And he and his younger brother were good friends. He and Jordan were good together. Jordan had some problems in high school and tended to get off the beaten path, and so his dad sent him up to Washington, Idaho, live with a friend to finish high school, and he finished his last year up there, then came back and started college, and has had some major difficulties to overcome during his life. Talent, they're all athletic and liked sports. Some tennis players, some football players. Joe was probably the most athletic. Jim probably the least. Jeff was more an individual. He liked skiing, doing things by himself, but didn't ever want to get involved with playing with his dad and his brothers. Jill was very athletic, wanted to pursue that in high school, and did well. I maybe could tell a couple of little miracles that occurred. When we were living in California, David was getting his master's degree. We moved to the student housing second year, his academic year. And one morning, we were living in student housing, and I was having trouble with the bathroom, the toilet. So I said to Jeff, who was only, I think, 5, maybe 6, I want you to take this note to the office and come right back. However, I'd been working in a doctor's office when David was in getting his master's degree. So when Jeff heard, take this to the doctor's office, he thought I meant the doctor in Berkeley, California, that was on Telegraph Avenue. I mean, it was like 5 miles away. So after they didn't come back after an hour, and I checked all the neighbors and the playground, and they still weren't there. And after it got to be about noon, he'd been gone for 3 hours. I asked around, nobody could find Jeff or Jim. And I don't think he'd shown up at the office with the note. So I contacted David and said, Jim and Jeff are lost, and we don't know where they are. So we let the police know, and they started looking for 2 little lost boys on the main street into Berkeley, California, and they found them. They didn't consider they were lost. They thought we just didn't know how to turn the right street to turn to get to the office. So that was a misunderstanding. And we lost the boys for about 3 or 4 hours. I mean, I was petrified in busy California, a busy street, and the boys were gone for 3 or 4 hours. But the police brought them back, and I didn't know whether to hug them or spank them. And when Jeff said, well, Mom, I couldn't find the office. I didn't know which street to turn up. They'd been stopping at gumball machines and things trying to get me. They were having a good time. And but anyway, that was one little trauma when we were living in California. The other one is a miracle that occurred when we were moving up to Washington. We had a truck and a car, and we loaded all of our things into the truck or car to leave early on a Saturday morning. And we had taken some things that we didn't need, some food, storage, some beds and things, over to a new convert. While we were there visiting, he said, "Now if you have any problems, here's my phone number." Tucked it in David's shirt pocket, and we said, "We won't have any problems, no problems, nothing, no problem at all." But that morning, when we were loading up, David had given the boys different things to carry out and put either in the truck or the car. Jim was supposed to bring my purse with all of our credit cards, money, everything we needed was in that purse. And because he was anxious to get in the truck with his dad, he just left the purse by the side of the car, by the sidewalk. We took off early in the morning, and when we got to some busy town in California, we stopped for gas. We loaded up the tanks, and then David said, "June, where's your purse with all of our money in it?" We looked everywhere, no purse. And we panicked. And then we thought, we need to say a prayer. We said a prayer, and as we did, David felt this rustle in his shirt, and he thought, "That's the phone number of our friend." So he asked the gas station attendant for a dime to call our friend in Los Angeles and said, "Would you or your wife go over and look near the parking lot in Mar Vista?" It was low-income housing. This is Saturday morning. We left early, so it had been 3 or 4 hours that purse had sat by the garbage cans and the thing. Well, about 10 minutes later, we got a phone call. It said, "Is it a Mexican leather-tooled purse with some S&H green stamps in it?" And David said, you're kidding, you found it?" And sure enough, that was our purse. And we said, "We'll be back in 3 hours. Don't you bother. I work for a motorcycle place, and I'll come up there and bring you the purse up to that town where we'd stopped over." So to me, that was a miracle. The fact that purse was still there after 3 or 4 hours on a busy Saturday morning in a housing district that had hundreds of people there.
So tell us the story when someone reached too early for seconds.
Well, it was traditional in our family that you had to finish everything on your plate before you took second helpings. So occasionally there'd be one piece of chicken left, and everybody was rushing to eat so they could get the remnants. And one day, I think Jay went to reach for the last chicken leg, and John took his fork and stabbed his hand as he reached. I don't think it did much damage, but it's a story that's been handed down about our eating habits, and I fixed a lot of food for those 7 boys and the 10 of us. It was an all-day project. In the morning, I'd think, what am I going to fix for dinner, and what are we having as a side, and what breads, anything to fill those boys up. And my hope was that at the end of the meal, everybody would say, I'm just fine. Occasionally, I'm still hungry, and I would just say, tough, we're not eating until breakfast. But
Did you fix all 3 meals?
no, we usually had a light breakfast, then they had school lunch. So I'm thinking of the younger boys when we were in Farmington. I think the older boys, when they were in Denver, Jeff used to come home, and I didn't find out for about 6 months. He was having a steak out of the freezer every day for lunch. When I went and looked, I thought, all my steaks are gone. Oh, well. We were a very healthy family. Very seldom did we have any broken bones, or we had a few accidents. But only Jay was hospitalized for rheumatic fever when he was about 12 or 13 years old. That was scary. We'd been to Hawaii, and my mother was taking care of the children. When we came home, Joe was doing funny things. His food was falling off his fork, and he was tipping his water and acting sort of strange. And we said to the boys, "What's wrong with Joe?" "No, he's just trying to get attention." And but that continued, and we thought there's something wrong here. So we called the doctors in the emergency room and said, "We have a son who's 13 and he's acting sort of strange." And they said, "Bring him in. It's probably rheumatic fever." And he was in the hospital for a few days. What we found out was that rheumatic fever usually either attacks one major organ like the heart or the kidneys, or the other, what they call, in England we call it St. Vitus dance. They have tremors, and it was called something, but that's what Joe had. Instead of affecting his heart or his main organs, he got this trauma, and that's what he was doing when he couldn't fasten his buttons or lift his fork up to his mouth. My mother was staying with the kids that day. We were in Hawaii on a holiday, and when we came back, she didn't tell us about the fire that somebody had set fire to in the pool table. She said, "Jay's been going downstairs and he got into your peanut butter. It was some storage, and he'd been eating it." That was more important than burning down the pool table. And she also said, "Your boys didn't like my rice pudding." In England, rice pudding is a dessert. You sweeten it with sugar and everything, and that's what Mother had fixed, and she was famous for her rice pudding. And the boys had only eaten rice as a savory dish, so when she served rice pudding, they said, "I don't want any, Grandma. I don't like this, Grandma." She was offended by that.
What were the major differences or similarities between serving in the temple with Grandpa and then serving as mission leaders in England?
As a sort of an aside, David had been called many times as a bishop, stake president, bishop's counselor. He was a temple president and a mission president, and his favorite job was a sealer in the temple. So when he was called as a mission president, I thought, he's going to be great. He loves young people. He's got that kind of personality. He's a great leader. I didn't worry about him at all. I worried about me. I thought, I'm not a leader. I've just been a mother and a child. So for me, it was a very growing experience. For David, piece of cake. He worked well with the missionaries. He was very conscientious, interviewed them and made them write him letters. And so our mission was, I think, very successful because David was such a good leader. Our temple presidency, on the other hand, was very difficult. I mean, early morning to late at night. We served an 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift actually. It started at 5 in the morning if you were on the early shift. Each couple had a day off, but the other two couples had to either do a 10-hour shift, the early one from 5 in the morning, turning on the lights and getting started, or at 2 in the afternoon till 10 and then turning off temple lights. It was very busy. The couples hardly ever intersected. We had a meeting once a week for about 20 minutes when the early shift was there before when the late shift came. So that was just hard work. David wasn't able to seal, of course. He interviewed people for positions at the temple, and we were very busy, but it wasn't his favorite job. He wanted to seal. He loved sealing, and that's what we did for that last 8 years or so before the temple closed, because he only taught or sealed for a couple of months before Elder Bruce Hafen called him into the presidency, which was busy for 3 years. So then we were able to be workers before they closed the temple down. And I know, I can say without a doubt that was his favorite position of all the positions he held throughout his service in the church, was to be a sealer. That was his favorite job.
Dive a little bit deeper into dating Grandpa and meeting him.
Well, that summer that we both graduated from high school, I had started beauty school because I got a scholarship. Grandpa was working for a tiling company. He wanted to earn money to go to BYU. Too proud to take money from his father, even though he'd worked hard in Idaho. But said, no, I can handle this. So he was working for tiling and living with his brother Bruce in the basement. And so when he came to church the first week at the sacrament table, we girls, there were 6 of us that sang together and danced, did everything together. We all, wow, here's a new boy, because he brought a friend, Roy Benyon, who moved to BYU as a student with him, good family friends. And at the end of the sacrament meeting, those 2 boys walked over to we 6 girls who were just walking out of the chapel, and the one boy, David from Idaho, said, "Would you girls like a ride home?" We said, "Well, we only live 2 blocks from here." "That's okay, why don't you hop in?" And so he and his friend were in the front seat, and me and one of the girls jumped into the front seat. And he said, "Well, is it okay if we take a sort of a detour? I've got some rocks in the back of my car." It was famous at that time to undersling your car. You wanted it to be low to the ground. So he put the rocks in there, and I guess he decided that was too gas consuming. So he made this a detour to drop these rocks out, somewhere out in the desert or wherever. And when we came back, and he walked me to the door, he said, "Would you like to go dancing on Saturday night?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love that." So that was our first date. I think we went to Salt Air. That old, I think. Anyway, he loved to dance. To tell you the truth, I thought David was strange. He was an Idaho boy. He always buttoned up his shirts. He wore funny looking shoes. He combed his hair different than the Salt Lake boys. And I thought, he's unusual. But he had such a love of life and so much confidence in himself. I mean, he just was friendly with everybody, never felt timid or out of, so he actually dated during that summer, went to mostly church activities. In fact, one unusual thing was we had dated most of the summer when he'd come, when he come to church activities and dances, and for some reason he stopped dating me, and I didn't understand why. But toward the end of the summer, there was a dance at the church, and the last dance, they said, this is the last dance, and one of the boys in the ward that's sort of handicapped, and I showed kindness to him, and I usually danced with him where the other girls wouldn't do it. Well, the last dance came, and here's Ralph Soam, the boy, and David coming toward me, and I thought, I hope David makes it first, and he did. And I said to him, what's wrong? You stopped dating me. Well, one of my girlfriend's brothers, an older brother, he'd had problems. He had told David, you don't want to go with her. She's just leading you on. He made me sound like a flirt or something. And David believed it. And so I said, I'm not that way at all. And I feel bad that you listened to a stranger, that took my part. That was, so that was just before he left for college. We dated all that summer. And then he came up every weekend with his friend Roy, the one that had been at the sacrament table with him. Roy drove the car. David and I dated on Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. He ate dinner with my family, and then he'd go back to BYU. I really think that those dinners at Mother's, she had roast, potatoes, vegetables, everything. What do you call them? The little popovers. They're famous in England. Mother made them every Sunday dinner, and David loved them. I really think he thought when he married me he'd get those every Sunday. I didn't like them. I didn't like making them, so he got took on that one. I was not a good cook. Mother was queen of the kitchen, and she wouldn't let me, and she did everything. I might peel potatoes or apples, but I didn't get to cook. So I think David thought, she's going to be just like her mother. Wasn't the case. That's another cute story. When he, I don't know if it's on or off, but when we first got married, we were on very limited budgets. Actually, I think we spent $6 a week on groceries, usually $1 for 3 pounds of hamburgers, some bread, milk. And he invited his parents, who were coming down from Idaho, to dinner. And I said, David, I'm not ready to entertain yet. That's okay. Whatever you fix, my folks will love it. And so they came, I think, on a Friday evening. I'd been at work, but I'd fixed a meatloaf and baked potatoes, and I thought, well, just turn that on when I get home from work, and everything will be fine. Well, they came, and we had a little round table. It was just a little bit bigger than that in the kitchen. The meatloaf, it said an hour, and I put it in for an hour, but it was cold from the refrigerator, so it wasn't cooked in an hour. So I had to cut off the edges. They're the only parts that were cooked. The baked potatoes were still hard in the middle. I'd fixed scalloped corn, cream-style corn. I scorched it. It tasted scorched. I'd made a strawberry pie, and it didn't set up. The Jell-O didn't, so when I cut it, all of the stuff fell out. So I went in, after his parents left, threw myself on the bed, and I said, it's your fault. You shouldn't have invited them. I wasn't ready to entertain. Oh, June, they loved it. They appreciated it. That was, I think, my first argument. I said, you shouldn't have invited them. I wasn't ready. I don't know if that's the end of that story, but...
Tell us about your nursing degree and some of the jobs you had.
Well, when we lived in Denver, the boys were getting older. my baby was like 3 or 4 years old, I said to David, I want to go to school. I never got a college education, and I feel I'm inferior to you, who had a master's degree. I'd like to go to college, not back. I'd like to go. He said, you're crazy. Don't you have enough to do taking care of all these children? I said, no, I've got a good mind, and I just feel like I'd like to go to school. He said, okay. I think he felt she's going to get tired after one semester and quit. So I did take one class in Denver, and when we moved to Farmington the next year, I said, I think I'll what do you call it?
Enroll or
yeah,
apply.
or try to get into Weber. And I, of course, had requirements that I had to take. But I put my name down to be accepted into the nursing school at Weber. They took 100 a year up there then. But by the time I got my requirements out of the way, I was ready to be admitted into the school. And that was like a 3-year program. I had a good friend that she and I were the older ones, students. We were both 40 years old, had a family of boys. But we were at the top of the class. Seemed like every test we took, Joyce and I were up at the top. But I had told David, it's only the morning. I only have to go in mornings. I'll be home in the afternoon to take care of the boys, fix dinner, etc. One day, I had to stay in the afternoon to watch some movies at 2 o'clock, and I didn't get home till about 4. And he said, okay, you told me this and you told me that. And I said, this is just a one-time thing. And he still went on, and I said, okay, I'm quitting. If I don't have your support, then I'm not gonna continue. And he said, no, I don't want you to quit. And I said, well, if you aren't gonna support me, I will. And his attitude changed after that. And he started telling the boys, if you're hungry, you grab something to eat, or if you need something ironed, you iron it yourself because your mom's busy. And that was sort of the turnaround and I think he was glad and pleased when I graduated. I was going to go for a nursing degree, and partway through I thought, I don't really want to be a full-time nurse. Maybe I'd rather go for teaching school so that I could go when the kids were in school. So I changed my major from nursing to elementary ed and finished up with a degree in general education studies, which I'm grateful I did. I never worked as a nurse. I never worked as a school teacher, but I accomplished what I set out to do, which was get my degree. I was satisfied. David said, do you want to go back and get a master? No, I'm happy. I've graduated. I did what I wanted to do, and I'm okay. And I stayed home and just traveled with David and enjoyed grandkids things. I never worked. That was part of the back of my mind. I thought, if ever anything happened to David, I want to be able to go out and maybe not support us, but keep busy. But the knowledge that I gained there and the confidence that I gained thinking, I'm a college graduate, and I think in my children's eyes, I went up. Mom is a good student. She's smart, and they used to always ask their dad for help with homework. They started asking me. And so my 3 or 4 years at Weber was a great accomplishment for me, and one that I felt was worthy of any sacrifices that I or my family had to make. In the northern part of England where I lived, in Durham County, it was a lot of mining and farming and common people, and they had what they called a Geordie accent. I don't know where Geordie came from, but it was a sort of a sing-songy, so they'd say, Well, she's been poorly, hasn't she? They always finished a quote with a question, you know. So, oh, the weather's awful, isn't it? And they used to leave off their H's, you know. So they'd say an house instead of a house, but they'd put them on somewhere. My dad used to say a onion. He put an H on in front of an onion. So it's an unusual accent, but it's a very peaceful. You know, some accents I think are ugly, but I think our accent up in northern England was a quiet, sing-songy. When Grandpa went to England, when we went back after, I'd been here 20 or 30 years, we finally earned enough money to go back on a trip to England, and we went to Scandinavia, and we're gone for about 3 weeks. When I wanted to go back and show him the little school that I went to as a little girl during the war, we needed instructions, so he would ask a man, can you tell us how to get to Rose Hill Elementary, or whatever the name of the school? And the man was there, oh, did you go there and you didn't this and I'd say to David, he said, I had to translate everything that anybody told him, you know, what they'd said. And so it was almost like a foreign language up north. But as I said, every time they said something, they always finished up with and when I had been on that trip to England, I came back here to the States, I started doing that and say, well, it's bad weather, isn't it? It was just a habit. I picked up the accent and the traditions from England, because I still have cousins over there. And they would come over occasionally, whenever I talked to them, I'd pick up the accent. And he said, I only used my accent when I went home. When I was with my girlfriends or at school, I always spoke American. Unlike my mother and dad, who never lost their English accent. And my brother he sounded British more than he did American. He never got the American accent.
Tell us about the story when you went to visit the grocers when you were little.
All right, I'll try to use my British accent on this, but when I was about 10 years old, I thought I was a very clever girl. I mean, I got good marks at school, and I was what we would call smart. So my mother asked me to go to the grocers. This is a little shop where they sold, you had to ask for things across the counter. And Mother had sent me for just 2 or 3 items and given me, I think, a £10 note, which was almost half of our food budget for a week. And after I took the note and the money, I started off, it was getting dark at night. It gets dark in northern England by about 4 or 5 o'clock at night. So it was getting dark, and all I thought of was, I can remember the things that Mom asked me to get at the store. So I memorized the 3 items and threw away the note. I got to the grocers and said, I need sugar and salt and something else. And they said, that'll be 6 shillings and 3pence. So I gave him the money and realized that I'd thrown away the money and kept the note with the items on it. And I said, I'm sorry, can you wait a minute? And he said, yeah, I can wait. So I went out, it was dark again, and I started scrounging around on the ground looking for this little white piece of paper. And about halfway up the block, I still hadn't found it. I started to cry. I thought my mom was going to kill me. And a lady was out on the sidewalk, and she said, what's the matter, love? And I said, I lost my money. I lost a £10 note. My mom's going to kill me when I get home. And she said, she called a little boy over and she said, Bobby, give her the money. And I said, oh, you found it? And I took the money from the little boy, of course, and thanked him and rushed back to the grocery store and picked up the items, paid the man, and went home. And Mom said, what took you so long? And I said, I talked to some friends on the way, and I've always remembered how, pride made me suffer the fact that I had done such a stupid thing in thinking I can remember what Mom asked me to buy, and so I'll just throw away the note. My mother's father had a sister who worked for the office in England as a secretary, and she wrote to him one time and said, Albert, I've investigated an American church, and I believe it's true, and I'd like you to listen to some of their missionaries, if you would, and see what you think. And so they did invite the missionaries in. They did accept the gospel. They had their children baptized when they were 8 years old. But unfortunately, my mother's father died when she was 10 years old. She was the oldest of 7 children. And my grandmother kept active in the church, raised her children, had them baptized, etc. And so I owe a lot to Albert and Anne, who accepted the church when it was, your neighbors sort of didn't want to befriend you anymore. And then when Grandpa died, great-grandpa, she had to raise these children on her own. It was very difficult for her, but she remained a stalwart forever after that. In fact, I think she held me when I was a baby. I get mixed up between grandparents and great-grandparents. My mother's mother, yes, Anne.
What was the last name?
Short.
Short.
That was Mother's maiden name. That was Albert and Anne's last name was Short, and then Mother married an Almond, but Uncle Stan's name was Short. And all the Shorts came to America when Uncle Stan invited them over. We didn't think they'd all come, but all the Shorts came, settled in Rose Park in Salt Lake City. Uncle Stan gave them jobs till they found something, earned money. My dad worked for Uncle Stan for a couple of months that summer, and about killed him off. He was very fair complected, and to carry the bricks, that's what he was, a hod carrier. He had to carry the bricks. He said, I can't do this anymore out in the hot sun. So he applied for a job as a janitor at West High School, where I was going to school. And he served there for 30 years till he retired, and earned enough money to buy a home, a car, go back and see his mother every year when he told her he'd go back every 2 years. So he was a wealthy man compared to his brothers who lived in England. Took all of their savings, their earnings, to just provide for a living. And here Dad had a good life and was able to go back to England every year to see his mother till she died.
So are there Shorts still in Utah? I don't come across that last name very often.
My Uncle Stan had 7 children. The oldest one, who is the oldest in the family, is older than Ronnie, my brother. So he was the first grandchild, because my Uncle Stan had married younger than my mother did. My mother was up in Scotland. So Ronnie was born 2 years after Raymond. And he became a politician. He's in South Salt Lake. He moved out of Rose Park and moved farther south. And from what I understand, has been running in politics. And he's still alive. So he must be 94. Ronnie was 2 years older than I'm almost 90. So he must be 94, still alive. Yeah, it's because everything was natural. Walking, the food was fairly uncomplicated. We never ate sweets during the war. There was no sugar. We had a sugar ration. So mostly Mother made bread, and I didn't mention that, but Mother and Dad had a bakery when they first got married, and Ronnie and I were babies, and that's what they were when the war broke out. So when we left our hometown, they left the bakery. Dad was sent to a camp for soldiers. We went to Astana, and part of our house got bombed, and people went in and took all the bakery equipment, so they never went back to the bakery. But that's why Mother was such a good baker, and that's why my dad was sent to this camp for English soldiers rather than being sent to Germany, because they supposedly was a baker. That was his profession. But all he did was put the loaves in the oven, take the loaves out. He didn't know how to bake, but it saved him from being sent across to Germany to fight. So that was a blessing. And every time he came home on leave, that's one of my younger siblings, was conceived. So that's where Dennis, Wendy, and Russell came from. Where there'd been 5 years between me and my 3 younger siblings.
Here we go!